promptly to child welfare in their local Department of Human Services county office or to the statewide child abuse hotline by calling 1-800-522-3511. Yes, this does include the owners, operators, and staff of all child care centers and homes. It is important to remember you do not have to know all the facts. You do not have to have all of the answers. If you suspect child abuse or neglect, you have to report the incident to child welfare. Let child welfare do the investigation and make the decisions. Failure to report suspected child abuse or neglect in Oklahoma can result in criminal charges being filed against you. It is natural for you to be concerned about your obligation to report. It is likely you will have questions about what you have seen and heard. Do not hesitate to contact Child Welfare Services or daycare licensing for guidance. As an employee, be aware of your center's procedures for reporting. However, you are ultimately responsible for reporting the suspected abuse or neglect. What is the definition of child abuse? In Oklahoma, it is defined as harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare by a person responsible for the child's health or welfare. Harm or threatened harm may occur through non-accidental physical or mental injury, sexual abuse, or neglect. A child means a person under 18 years of age. Physical abuse is non-accidental injury to a child. Physical injury means temporary or permanent damage or impairment to the body. Mental injury means an injury to the child's intellectual or psychological capacity. It is the result of a pattern of cruel acts or statements made to the child or in the child's environment. This could include a child who is exposed to domestic violence. Sexual abuse includes rape, incest, lewd or indecent acts or proposals, and sexual exploitation. Neglect is indicated when the parent or person responsible for the child fails to act in a prudent or responsible manner to provide for the health and general welfare of the child. Long-term neglect could cause serious harm to a child. Examples would include inadequate clothing, food, shelter, medical care, or supervision appropriate to the child's age or development. Please remember, child welfare is here to assist you with difficult situations. It is vital that you remember that as caregivers of children, you are an important link in providing for the health and safety of the children for whom you provide care.
Our next topic is another difficult issue for child care providers. Sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, is not an issue many of us want to think about. The death of a child in your care is devastating. While SIDS is not entirely common, it is something you need to be aware of. We took our camera out to meet with Pat Dameron, the coordinator of the SIDS program for the Oklahoma State Department of Health. She filled us in on this tragic situation. Let's take a look at our segment on SIDS. You're with the Oklahoma State Department of Health. What's your position there?
Yes, I'm the coordinator of the SIDS program, and our program provides support and education for any kind of SIDS issues that may occur in the state of Oklahoma.
Well, what is SIDS?
Well, SIDS stands for Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. The definition of SIDS is the unexplained and sudden death of an infant under the age of 1 year.
Is this what we sometimes hear referred to as crib death?
Yes.
All right. Well, how many children are affected by SIDS?
Well, in the United States, we generally see about 6,000 deaths a year. In the state of Oklahoma, traditionally what we've seen on an average is 80 to 100 deaths. But since 1994, we have begun seeing a decrease. Generally, it's between 60 and 62 deaths, and then in 1998, it got down to 51 deaths. So we're slowly seeing a decline.
Well, what do we know about the victims of SIDS?
Well, there are some things that we do know. We know that generally infants die between the ages of 2 and 4 months. That's when we see the peak of deaths. And then after 6 months, it begins to go down and decline. But we can still have a definition of SIDS deaths up to 1 year. The other thing that we know is that these are generally healthy babies, that these are full-term babies. So sometimes people think that these are sickly babies, but they're not generally. The other thing that we know is that these babies, generally we see a higher rate of boys dying of SIDS than girls. We also see a higher rate of SIDS in the winter months. Now, we can't predict SIDS and we can't prevent SIDS. We don't know what causes SIDS, so we don't have the ability to do that. The other thing is that we will generally see that the baby dies within seconds. So sometimes parents will say, I didn't hear them cry out. Did they suffer? But they die within seconds. There doesn't seem to be a struggle in that respect. The other thing is that sometimes people will think that these babies have suffocated. And this is not a suffocation. This is a different kind of death.
Does the research help us in any way to help lower or minimize the risk of sudden infant death syndrome?
Well, as I mentioned, we really don't know what causes SIDS, but there are some tips that we can have present within a home or within a daycare setting that would lower the risk of a child dying of SIDS. I'd like to take you to a sleeping area where I could show you some of those things. This is a good example of the sleep environment that we're looking for. First of all, it has a firm mattress. And the other thing that we're looking at is that the mattress does not have any space between the rails and the mattress itself, so that there's no space that the baby's face can get down in there and get suffocated. The other thing that we don't want to see, and what we would call a bad surface, would be a waterbed, a beanbag chair, anything where a baby can get their face into a pocket and not be able to breathe properly. The other thing is that we don't want any stuffed animals in here with the baby while the baby's trying to sleep, like she doesn't have any now. Again, so that the baby can't get their face up there with something that they couldn't breathe properly. The other thing is that we don't want the room too hot. A lot of times with babies we think we need the room hotter than it needs to be. If you're comfortable, the baby's comfortable. Then we want a smoke-free environment. We don't want an environment where anyone's smoking or there's passive smoking going on. This makes a higher risk for SIDS. The last thing, and the reason that we're seeing, and we feel that we're seeing a decline in SIDS, is because of back to sleep. And that is an initiative that we're seeing all worldwide on putting babies on their back to sleep. Now, this will not prevent SIDS 100%, but what we're seeing is a very drastic reduction in SIDS by putting babies on their backs.
I asked Pat to describe to us what a child care provider should do in the event that SIDS occurs in the child care setting. She let us know that the very first thing a provider should do is initiate your emergency plan. Call 911 and alert the pediatric emergency trained staff member at your center for assistance. Then she walked us through the steps that would take place next.
First, the EMT would arrive, the emergency medical technicians. Then the police would arrive. And sometimes this is very hard on people because they will come in and start a criminal investigation because they don't know what they are walking into. Then at that point we also will have the ME or the medical examiner come, and they will be the one that will examine the child and pronounce the death. One of the things also that we need to remind people is an autopsy will be done. This is the only way that we can verify if this is SIDS or not, or if the child died of something else. The other thing that we have to also be aware of is that in a child care center, you are required to notify licensing by the next working day.
Before we finished our discussion on SIDS, I asked Pat about the guilt that a child care provider might feel after experiencing such a tragedy. She had some helpful words of advice.
Well, I think it's important for a provider to remember that as long as they've given the best care possible to that child, that they really have no reason to feel guilty. Nothing is probably going to take away the inevitable